As a young working woman in the public eye, I have had to learn some lessons the hard way, but those lessons have taught me to be strong. When a secret royal document surfaced, it sent shock waves through Buckingham Palace. Princess Beatrice, known for her quiet grace, was seen in tears after learning of a shocking hidden deal between her father, Prince Andrew, and Queen Camilla. The paper, sealed for years, exposed something she never imagined: a private arrangement that seemed to protect Camilla while putting Andrew in a deeper web of scandal. As the truth spread, whispers turned to outrage, and one haunting question lingered in every royal corridor. What exactly had Camilla done to keep this secret buried? Join us to find out. The letter that changed everything. Princess Beatrix's London home had always been a quiet environment with gentle shadows across the room where cardboard boxes sat stacked against the wall. Each box held pieces of a life that had shaped the entire nation, her grandmother's life. Queen Elizabeth had been gone for some time now, but the ache of missing her never seemed to fade. Today, Beatrice had finally found the courage to sort through the belongings that had been passed down to her. She moved slowly, reverently, lifting delicate items one by one. There were handwritten notes on royal stationery, old photographs tucked into leather albums, and programs from state dinners decades past. Each item carried a memory, a whisper of the woman who had ruled with grace and dignity for so long. Beatrice smiled through her tears as she traced her grandmother's handwriting on a Christmas card from years ago. Then her fingers brushed against something different. Beneath a stack of official correspondence, she found an envelope that made her pause. It was cream-colored, heavier than the others, and sealed with red wax that bore the Queen's personal seal. Across the front, in her grandmother's unmistakable handwriting, were words that sent a chill down Beatrix's spine. Private for the Queen's eyes only, her heart began to race. Why would this envelope be here, mixed in with items meant to be distributed among family? The handwriting felt protective, almost urgent, as if the Queen had been guarding something precious or something dangerous. Beatrice held the envelope in her trembling hands, torn between respect for her grandmother's privacy and a growing need to understand what secret had been deemed so important. She stood there for what felt like hours, though only minutes passed. Her mind raced with possibilities. Should she reseal it? Should she destroy it unopened, honoring whatever privacy her grandmother had intended? But something deep inside whispered that this envelope had found its way to her for a reason. Perhaps some truths were meant to surface, even after those who kept them had gone. With shaking fingers, she carefully broke the seal. The pages inside were covered in typed text with handwritten notes in the margins, her grandmother's notes. As Beatrice began to read, the color drained from her face. Her eyes widened with each sentence, each revelation more shocking than the last. The document outlined agreements, arrangements, and promises made behind closed doors. Her breath came faster as she turned to the final page. Then she saw it. The last line hit her like a physical blow, a reference to a private agreement between Andrew and Camilla. The words swam before her eyes. Her father, the Queen Consort, an agreement that had been kept hidden, locked away in an envelope that should never have been opened. Beatrix's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the papers. She whispered into the empty room, her voice barely audible, "This can't be true." But the evidence was there in black and white, annotated by the one person who never lied, her grandmother. Whatever this agreement entailed, it had been serious enough for the Queen to document it, to seal it away, to mark it as eyes only. Beatrice felt her world tilting. Everything she thought she understood about her family suddenly felt uncertain. She knew at that moment that she couldn't pretend she hadn't seen it. She couldn't unsee what she now knew. Before anyone else stumbled upon this secret, before it could be used or manipulated, she needed to understand the full truth. She needed to know what her father and Camilla had agreed to and why her grandmother had kept it hidden. The next morning, Beatrice returned to the palace, her face a careful mask of composure. She greeted staff members with her usual warmth, but inside, she felt like she was carrying a bomb. The palace felt different now, colder somehow, or perhaps it had always been this way, and she was only now seeing it clearly. As she walked through the familiar corridors, she noticed things she'd overlooked before. Staff members speaking in hushed tones who fell silent when she passed. Nervous glances exchanged between longtime employees. She caught fragments of whispered conversations. Documents resurfacing in palace secrets and the late queen's papers. Were others searching for what she had already found? Did someone know the envelope was missing? The thought made her walk faster, her heart pounding against her ribs. She needed someone she could trust, someone who might have answers. Her mother would know something. She had, too. Sarah Ferguson had been at the center of royal drama for decades. If anyone understood the hidden mechanisms of palace politics, it was her. Beatrice found her mother in the private sitting room, sunlight streaming through the tall windows. But when she mentioned the document, when the words Deal and Camilla left her lips, she watched her mother's face transform. All color vanished. Sarah's hands gripped the armrest of her chair so tightly her knuckles turned white. Beatrice, stop, Sarah said, her voice strained. You don't understand what you're getting into. Then help me understand, Mom. Please. Sarah stood abruptly, pacing to the window, her back to her daughter. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a warning that frightened Beatrice more than anything in the envelope had. Some deals are darker than scandals, darling. Some secrets are kept for reasons that have nothing to do with protecting reputations and everything to do with protecting lives. The words hung in the air like a threat, but instead of discouraging Beatrice, they only strengthened her resolve. Her mother's fear confirmed that the document was real, that whatever agreement had been made was serious enough to still carry weight years later. She had to know the full truth, no matter how dark it might be. That night, long after the palace staff had retired and the corridor stood empty and silent, Beatrice crept through the shadows toward her father's private office. Her heart hammered so loudly she was certain someone would hear it. Every step felt like a betrayal, but also like the only honest thing she could do behind the locked door. The office sat in near darkness, illuminated only by the pale moonlight streaming through heavy curtains. Beatrice stood frozen just inside the doorway, her eyes adjusting to the shadows. The room felt like a tomb of secrets, shelves lined with leather-bound folders, a desk covered in correspondence that looked decades old, and photographs whose faces she could barely make out in the dim light. Everything here had been carefully preserved, kept away from curious eyes, until now. She moved carefully across the thick carpet, barely breathing, afraid that even the smallest sound might alert someone to her presence. Her fingers traced along the edge of the desk where classified envelopes sat in neat stacks, each marked with official seals and dates spanning years. Some bore her grandmother's seal. Others carried markings she didn't recognize. Then she saw them, documents bearing initials that made her stomach drop. CP again and again. Camilla Parker B.S., now Camilla, Queen Consort, the woman who had married into the family, who had smiled beside Charles through countless public appearances, who had seemed to finally find acceptance after years of public scrutiny. Her initials appeared on document after document, threaded through her father's private papers like a hidden connection no one was supposed to see. Beatrix's hands shook as she pulled one envelope free. Inside was a letter handwritten on expensive stationery. She recognized Camilla's distinctive handwriting immediately. She had seen it on birthday cards and thank you notes over the years, but this letter was different. This one had never been meant for family gatherings or polite correspondence. The words blurred as tears filled Beatrix's eyes, but she forced herself to read. Camilla was thanking Andrew, thanking him for protecting her from exposure during a difficult time. The gratitude was warm, almost affectionate, as if she were writing to a trusted ally, a co-conspirator. The implications crashed over Beatrice like a wave. Her father had made some kind of deal. He had taken actions that shielded Camilla when she was vulnerable, when public opinion could have destroyed her position in the family. But that protection had cost him. While Camilla's reputation had slowly been rehabilitated, accepted, even celebrated, Andrew's had crumbled into scandal and disgrace. He had been exiled from public life, stripped of his titles and duties, left to live in shadow while others basked in the light. Had his ruin been the price of her survival? The betrayal felt viscerally personal. Beatrice pressed her hand against her mouth, fighting back a sob. Whatever agreement had been made, it seemed her father had sacrificed himself. And for what? For Camilla? For the institution? For some greater game she couldn't yet understand? She reached for another folder, desperate to understand more when she heard them. Footsteps in the corridor outside, steady, purposeful footsteps drawing closer. Panic flooded through her. She couldn't be found here, not now, not before she understood everything. Her eyes darted around the room and landed on the heavy curtains beside the window. In one swift motion, she slipped behind them, pressing herself against the cold glass, her heart thundering so loudly she was certain it would give her away. The door opened. Light from the hallway spilled into the room, and Beatrice held her breath. Through a gap in the curtains, she could see a figure enter, one of the royal aides, a man she recognized from palace functions. He moved with the confidence of someone who belonged there, who had every right to access this office. In his hands he carried a folder. Even from her hiding place, Beatrice could read the label typed across its front. Royal Agreement 1999. Her mind raced. 1999. That was over 25 years ago, before her mother and father's divorce was finalized, before Camilla had been publicly acknowledged as Charles's partner, before so many of the changes that had reshaped their family. Whatever deal had been struck, whatever agreement her father had entered into, it had roots that stretched back through decades of carefully buried history. The aide placed the folder on the desk, rearranged a few papers, and then left as quietly as he had come. The door clicked shut. Darkness returned. Beatrice waited, counting her heartbeats, making certain he wouldn't return. When silence had settled back over the room like a blanket, she emerged from behind the curtain. Her legs felt weak, but her resolve had turned to steel. This wasn't just about one envelope found among her grandmother's things. This wasn't just about a letter of gratitude or a single agreement. This was a web that stretched across decades, touching everyone in her family, shaping events she had witnessed without understanding what lay beneath. She moved to the desk and picked up the folder the aide had brought. Her fingers trembled as she opened it, already knowing that what she found inside would change everything. Truth wasn't going to be simple. It wasn't going to be easy to hear, but she had come too far to turn back now. Whatever happened in 1999, whatever deal was struck in the shadows of that year, had set everything else in motion. The scandals, the divorces, the public fall from grace, it was all connected, and Beatrice was going to trace this thread back to its origin. No matter where it led, she had to know, not just for herself, but for her father, for her family, for the truth that had been locked away for far too long. When promises were made, The folder felt heavy in Beatrice's hands, as though the weight of years had somehow transferred itself into the paper. She opened it slowly, and suddenly she wasn't standing in her father's dark office anymore. The documents transported her backward through time, pulling her into a world she had been too young to understand when she lived through it. It was the late 1990s. The nation was still reeling from Princess Diana's death. Monarchy stood on shaky ground, and every move the royal family made was scrutinized with unforgiving intensity. In this climate of suspicion and grief, Charles and Camilla's relationship had become a lightning rod for public fury. The woman many blamed for Diana's unhappiness was now openly in Charles's life, and the country hadn't forgiven her. Neither had the Queen. Elizabeth had made her disapproval clear in private meetings and through icy silences at family gatherings. Camilla was barely tolerated, certainly not welcomed. Her future in the family looked uncertain at best, impossible. At worst, she needed allies within the palace walls, and those were dangerously hard to find. Andrew had been different. While others kept their distance, he had quietly supported Camilla. He understood what it meant to be on the outside of royal favor, to feel the cold judgment of both family and public. Perhaps that's why he extended a hand when others turned away. In private conversations and carefully worded advice, he became one of the few royals Camilla could count on. But nothing in the royal family came without a price. Camilla was shrewd enough to understand that loyalty should be repaid. She made Andrew a promise sealed not with signatures but with understanding. When his own troubles came, and they both knew troubles always came eventually, she would offer her silent backing. She would use whatever influence she gained to protect him. It was a mutual protection pact built on shared vulnerability and the knowledge that survival in the palace required allies willing to stand in the shadows. For years the arrangement worked beautifully. Camilla's position slowly strengthened. Public opinion began to shift, softened by carefully managed appearances. In the passage of time, she moved from outcast to accepted companion to finally wife. Each step forward was built on the foundation of strategic alliances, and Andrew's early support hadn't been forgotten. Then Andrew's controversies erupted into public view, scandals that would eventually strip him of his royal duties and exile him from public life. And when the storms came, Camilla kept her promise. Behind closed doors, she spoke words of support. She urged measured responses rather than immediate exile. She reminded others of complexity and context. Her influence was subtle, nearly invisible, but it was there. It might have remained hidden forever, but the Queen discovered fragments of it. Beatrice found her grandmother's private diary tucked within the folder, pages marked with dates from those turbulent years. Elizabeth's handwriting, usually so controlled and elegant, showed strain here. The entries were brief but devastating in their honesty. I have learned of an understanding between Andrew and Camilla that troubles me deeply. One entry began, that they should make private agreements affecting family matters without consultation, shows a disregard for unity that I find difficult to forgive. Another entry dated months later revealed even more pain. I do not know when my children began to see the family as a game of alliances rather than a bond of blood. Perhaps I failed them in this. The disappointment radiated from every word. Elizabeth had spent her life holding the family together, maintaining dignity and unity even when everything threatened to fall apart. To discover that her own son and her future daughter-in-law had created a secret pact, that they had traded favors and protection behind her back, must have felt like a fundamental betrayal. But what struck Beatrice most was the sadness. Beneath the disappointment and confusion, her grandmother's words carried a profound grief. I am tired. One late entry read simply, tired of secrets, tired of games. I wanted better for them all. Beatrice felt tears sliding down her cheeks, dropping onto the aged pages before she could stop them. Small wet circles bloomed on the paper. joining her grandmother's ink. She was crying for Elizabeth, who had carried this knowledge alone. She was crying for her father, who had made a deal that seemed reasonable at the time, but had bound him to consequences he couldn't escape. She was crying for the complexity of it all, for the impossible choices and the prices everyone had paid. The truth wasn't simple, it never was. Her father wasn't just a villain, and Camilla wasn't just a calculating outsider. They were people trying to survive in a system that crushed those who stood alone. They had reached for each other in darkness, made promises that seemed necessary, created bonds that would hold them both captive, and her grandmother had known, had carried that knowledge with grace and silence until her death. Beatrice closed the diary gently, her hands still trembling. The truth was more complicated than she'd imagined, more human and more heartbreaking. Now she had to decide what to do with it. Reckoning, Beatrice stood outside her father's private quarters, her hand raised to knock, but frozen in place. The documents were tucked safely in her bag, but they felt like they were burning through the leather, scorching her side. She had rehearsed what she would say a dozen times during the drive here, but now that the moment had arrived, all her carefully prepared words scattered like leaves in the wind. She knocked, 3 sharp raps that sounded too loud in the quiet hallway. When Andrew opened the door, he looked older than she remembered. The scandals and exile had carved lines into his face that hadn't been there a few years ago. His smile, once so confident and charming, now carried a weariness that broke her heart even before their conversation began. Beatrice. Darling, what a lovely surprise. She stepped inside and he closed the door behind her. The room felt suffocating, filled with the remnants of a life that had once been grand. Photographs from state visits, awards, and commendations now gathering dust, reminders of what had been lost. I need to talk to you about something, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. About Camilla, about an agreement. The change in his expression was immediate. The warmth drained from his face, replaced by something guarded and afraid. He moved to the window, his back to her, shoulders tense. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. Beatrice pulled the documents from her bag, her hands trembling slightly. I found grandmother's papers, the private envelope, and then I found more in your office, letters from Camilla thanking you for protecting her, documents about an agreement from 1999. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Andrew remained at the window, staring out at nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. You shouldn't have gone through my things, and you shouldn't have lied to this family for decades. The words came out sharper than she intended, but she couldn't take them back, didn't want to. He turned then, and she saw something crumble in his face. The denial fell away, and what remained was exhaustion and regret. He sank into a chair, suddenly looking every one of his ears. It wasn't supposed to be like this, he said quietly. When I helped her, when we made that arrangement, it seemed reasonable. Charles loved her. She made him happy. The Queen wouldn't accept it, and someone needed to bridge that gap. I thought I was helping the family by making secret deals, by trading favors like you were in some kind of political game. Andrew ran his hands through his hair, a gesture she remembered from childhood when he was frustrated or cornered. You don't understand how it works, Beatrice. Everything in this family is negotiation. Everything is a strategy. Camilla needed support to survive. I gave it to her, and in return, she promised to help me when my time came. She promised to help you, Beatrice repeated slowly, sitting down across from him. But when things turned dark, she turned her back. Her father's laugh was bitter and broken. She did more than turn her back. When the scandals hit, when I needed allies most, she was silent. Worse than silent, she agreed with those who wanted me exiled. All those years of support, All those private conversations where I defended her, stood up for her when others wouldn't. None of it mattered when it was my reputation on the line instead of hers. Beatrice felt her heart breaking, not just for what had happened, but for what it revealed. Her father had been manipulated, yes, but he had also willingly participated in the kind of deception that eroded everything the family was supposed to stand for. He had made choices that protected one person at the eventual cost of himself and others. The tragedy wasn't just in Camilla's betrayal. It was in his willing participation in a game that had destroyed them both. Why didn't you tell anyone? Why didn't you expose what she'd done and admit that I'd made deals in the shadows, that I'd promised royal favors in exchange for future support? I would have looked even worse. He met her eyes finally, and she saw genuine pain there. I made my choices, Beatrice. I have to live with them. She left her father's quarters feeling hollowed out, as if everything solid inside her had been scooped away. But as she walked through the palace corridors, something else began to build in the empty space: determination. This couldn't be where the story ended. Camilla couldn't be allowed to rise to the highest position in the land while standing on the ruins of the people she'd used along the way. Beatrice made a phone call that evening. She requested a private meeting with the queen consort, citing a charity event they were both involved with. Camilla's assistant confirmed the appointment for the following week. The wait felt interminable. When the day finally arrived, Beatrice was shown into one of Camilla's private sitting rooms. The space was elegant and warm, decorated with photographs and artwork that spoke of a woman who had fully embraced her role. Camilla entered moments later, gracious and smiling every inch the confident queen consort. "Beatrice, how lovely to see you. I'm so glad you reached out. We don't spend enough time together." The pleasantries felt like acid on Beatrix's tongue, but she returned the smile and accepted the offered tea. They sat across from each other, and the tension in the room began to build, though Camilla's expression remained pleasant. "I wanted to discuss something beyond the charity event," Beatrice said, setting her teacup down with deliberate care. She reached into her bag and pulled out the documents, laying them on the table between them like cards in a game neither wanted to play. Camilla's smile never wavered, but her eyes shifted to the papers and something flickered there. Recognition, calculation, unease. "I found these among my grandmother's things, letters you wrote to my father, documents about agreements made decades ago, promises exchanged." For a long moment, Camilla said nothing. She picked up her own teacup, sipped delicately, then set it down. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but firm, carrying the weight of someone who had survived too many storms to be easily shaken. "You don't understand the world you're trying to step into. Some things must stay buried. Why? Because they're inconvenient. Because they show you're not the victim you've spent years portraying yourself as." Camilla's eyes hardened. "I survived, Beatrice, in a family and a system designed to destroy anyone who didn't fit the perfect mold. I survived. Yes, I made alliances. Yes, I accepted help when it was offered. That's not manipulation. That's survival. You made promises to my father. You let him believe you would stand by him when he needed you. Then you abandoned him. Your father made his choices long before I was in any position to help or hurt him." Camilla leaned forward slightly, her composure cracking just enough to reveal steel underneath. "Don't blame me for his weakness." The words hung in the air like a slap. Beatrice stood, gathering the documents with shaking hands. She had expected denial, perhaps even contrition. She hadn't expected such cold dismissal of her father's pain. "You're right," Beatrice said softly. He did make his choices, but so did you, and people deserve to know what those choices were. She walked to the door, but Camilla's voice stopped her. If you do this, you'll destroy more than just me. You'll tear apart the carefully built peace this family has finally achieved. Is that what you want? More scandal, more pain? Beatrice turned back, meeting Camilla's gaze directly. I want the truth, whatever comes with it. She left the meeting with her legs trembling and her heart racing, but her mind was crystal clear. A plan was already forming, piece by piece, falling into place. She couldn't undo the past, couldn't erase the deals and betrayals that had shaped her family's history. But she could bring them into the light. She could make sure that the truth finally was told. When silence became a weapon, the palace had always been filled with whispers, but now those whispers carried Beatrice's name. Within days of her meeting with Camilla, the atmosphere shifted like a sudden drop in temperature. Staff members who had known her since childhood now avoided her eyes in the corridors. Conversation stopped abruptly when she entered a room. The silence felt deliberate, orchestrated, a message without words. Royal aides moved through the halls with nervous energy, their usual composure replaced by barely concealed anxiety. Something was happening behind the scenes. Decisions being made in rooms Beatrice wasn't invited into anymore. She could feel the machinery of palace politics grinding into motion, and she was caught in its gears. Charles was furious. She heard it through her mother, through carefully worded messages that made his rage clear, even in their restraint. The idea that family secrets might be dragged into public view had triggered something protective and fierce in him. He saw it as betrayal, as recklessness that could damage everything he and Camilla had built. His anger radiated through the palace hierarchy, influencing everyone beneath him. Then the isolation began in earnest. Phone calls went unanswered. Text messages were read but not replied to. Scheduled appearances were quietly canceled with vague explanations about diary conflicts. Invitations that should have arrived never came. Beatrice found herself cut off, pushed to the margins of the family she'd been born into. She understood what was happening. Camilla was tightening her influence like a noose, using the power she'd spent decades accumulating to silence anyone who might stand with Beatrice. It was subtle, almost invisible to outsiders, but devastating in its effectiveness. The queen consort didn't need to issue direct orders. Her displeasure was enough to make people fall in line. Beatrice felt the loneliness closing in. She sat in her home one evening, staring at the documents that had started everything, wondering if speaking the truth was worth becoming an exile in her own family. The weight of it pressed down on her chest until she could barely breathe. Then her phone rang. Eugenie. Her sister arrived within the hour, letting herself in with the key she'd always kept. She found Beatrice surrounded by papers, eyes red from crying, looking lost. "They're freezing me out," Beatrice said simply. "I know." Eugenie sat beside her, taking her hand. "But you're not alone. I'm here." The relief that flooded through Beatrice was overwhelming. One ally, one person who believed her, who wouldn't abandon her to face this alone. It was enough to make her sit up straighter, to breathe more easily. "We need to be smart about this," Eugenie said, her voice firm with determination. "If we just go public, they'll destroy the document's credibility. They'll say we forged them or misunderstood them. We need verification." The royal archivist, Beatrice, said suddenly, understanding dawning. "Someone independent who can confirm these are genuine, who can't be dismissed as biased." Eugenie nodded. "Someone who answers to history, not to Camilla." They spent the next hour planning, their voices low and urgent. The archivist would need to see the original documents, which meant bringing them into the restricted section of the palace archives. It would have to be done quietly at night when fewer eyes were watching. It was risky. If they were caught, the consequences would be severe. But staying silent felt like betraying not just their father, but their grandmother's memory and the truth itself. "Tonight," Beatrice said finally, "we will do it tonight. You." I squeezed her hand together, the truth in the shadows. The palace at night transformed into something ancient and forbidding, like a fortress built not just of stone, but of centuries of secrets. Beatrice and Eugenie moved through corridors that seemed darker than they should be. Despite the dim lights that burned at careful intervals, their footsteps echoed too loudly on the marble floors, each sound a potential alarm that might draw unwanted attention. The portraits lining the walls seemed to watch them pass. Kings and queens from generations past, their painted eyes following the sisters as they made their way deeper into the restricted wing. Beatrice felt the weight of their judgment, or perhaps their understanding. How many of them had faced moments like this when loyalty to truth collided with loyalty to the crown? They found the archivist waiting in a small office tucked away near the restricted section, exactly as planned. He was older than Beatrice had expected, his white hair and lined face speaking of decades spent in service to the crown. She recognized him vaguely from her grandmother's time, a quiet presence who had always hovered near the queen during official functions, carrying documents and whispering reminders. He stood when they entered, his expression grave. No pleasantries were exchanged. They all understood the risk they were taking simply by being here. Beatrice laid the documents on the desk between them with trembling hands. The archivist put on a pair of reading glasses and began examining each page with meticulous care. He studied the paper quality, the ink, the handwriting, the seals. The silence stretched for what felt like hours while the sisters waited, barely breathing. Finally, he looked up, removing his glasses slowly. His eyes held a sadness that made Beatrice's stomach drop even before he spoke. "These are authentic," he said quietly. "The paper stock matches what was used in the late 1990s for official correspondence. The Queen's handwriting and seal are genuine. I would stake my professional reputation on it." Relief and dread flooded through Beatrice in equal measure. Part of her had hoped, despite everything, that the documents might be clever forgeries, that this nightmare might have a simple explanation. But now that hope was gone, "There's something else you should know," the archivist continued, his voice dropping even lower. He glanced at the door, as if worried about being overheard even here in this isolated corner of the palace. "Your grandmother tried to destroy these documents. I was present when she gave the order not long before her health declined significantly." Beatrice leaned forward, her heart racing. What happened? Someone stopped her. The words hung in the air like smoke. Someone with enough influence to countermand even the Queen's direct order. The documents were quietly removed from the destruction list and placed in secure storage instead. I was told they were being preserved for historical purposes, but I knew better. They were being kept as insurance. "Camilla," Eugenie breathed, and the archivist's slight nod confirmed what they'd already suspected. The realization crashed over Beatrice like a physical blow. Camilla hadn't just made deals and broken promises. She had ensured that evidence of those deals survived, even against the Queen's wishes. She had kept the documents as leverage, as weapons to be used if anyone ever threatened her position. Elizabeth, in her final years, had tried to erase this stain on the family's history, but Camilla's influence had already grown too strong to oppose. Everything Beatrice had believed about her family, about the institution they represented, began to crumble. The monarchy wasn't just flawed, it was built on layers of manipulation and self-preservation that went deeper than she'd ever imagined. The people she'd trusted most had been playing games with each other for decades, and she'd been too naive to see it. The archivist gathered the documents carefully, replacing them in their folder. I verified what you asked me to verify. What you do with this information is your choice, but be careful. The people involved in these arrangements have spent years protecting them. They won't stop now. Beatrice and Eugenie left the office in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. They walked back through those shadow-filled corridors, past the watching portraits, their footsteps echoing in the emptiness. Beatrice felt hollowed out, as if everything solid inside her had been scraped away. Then she saw her. At the end of the long corridor, illuminated by a single lamp, stood a silhouette Beatrice would have recognized anywhere. Camilla wasn't moving, wasn't approaching, just standing there watching them. Even from this distance, Beatrice could feel the weight of that gaze, the message it carried. I know what you've done. I know what you're planning, and I'm not afraid. The sisters kept walking, refusing to look away, refusing to show fear. But when they finally turned the corner and the silhouette disappeared from view, Beatrice had to stop and lean against the wall, her legs shaking. She knows, Eugenie whispered. She's always known. Beatrice replied, that's the point. In that moment, something fundamental shifted inside Beatrice. She could no longer protect the family name. She could no longer participate in the pretense that everything was fine, that the monarchy stood on a foundation of honor and duty. The truth was uglier, more complicated, more human than the fairy tale presented to the world. That night, she sat at her desk and began to write. The letter to King Charles poured out of her in a flood of emotion and honesty she'd never allowed herself before. She explained everything: the envelope she'd found, the documents in Andrew's office, the diary entries from their grandmother, Camilla's letters, the archivist's confirmation. But more than that, she wrote about what it had done to her faith, to her understanding of who they were and what they represented. She pleaded with him for honesty, not for her own sake, but for the sake of the monarchy's future. How could an institution built on secrets and manipulation possibly survive in an age when truth always found its way to light? How could they ask for public trust while hiding such fundamental deceptions? She sealed the letter and had it delivered by hand the next morning. Charles read it 3 days later alone in his private study. Beatrice heard about it through her mother. How he'd sat motionless for nearly an hour after finishing, the pages spread before him on the desk. How visible pain had crossed his face, aging him years and moments. How he'd said nothing to anyone about its contents. And then that evening he burned it, every page reduced to ash in his fireplace. Beatrice learned this too and understood immediately what it meant. The truth could destroy Camilla's carefully rebuilt image. It could cast shadows over his entire reign before it had barely begun. He had made his choice: the institution over transparency, the crown over family, silence over truth. Beatrice sat with that knowledge for a long time, feeling something inside her finally settle into place. The truth would never officially come out. The palace would never acknowledge what had happened. History would be written by those with the power to control the narrative, just as it always had been. But she didn't have to participate in the lie. She began making arrangements quietly, speaking with advisors about stepping back from royal duties. Not a dramatic exit, not a public scandal, just a gradual withdrawal from the life she'd been born into. She would choose peace over pretense, authenticity over performance, her own integrity over the family's carefully maintained facade. It wasn't the ending she'd imagined when she first opened that envelope among her grandmother's belongings. But perhaps it was the only honest ending possible, breaking free. The gathering had been unbearable. Beatrice sat through it all. The polite conversation, the clinking of crystal glasses, the laughter that felt hollow and performative. Across the room, Camilla moved through the crowd with practiced grace, smiling and nodding, her composure absolutely perfect. She looked radiant, untouchable, as if the confrontation in her sitting room had never happened, as if the documents proving decades of manipulation didn't exist, as if Beatrix's pain was nothing more than a minor inconvenience already forgotten. Watching her was agony. The ease with which Camilla wore her mask, the seamless way she inhabited her role as queen consort, made something break inside Beatrice. She couldn't do this anymore, couldn't sit in rooms pretending everything was fine, couldn't smile for cameras while choking on secrets, couldn't be part of a system that valued appearance over truth. She stood abruptly, murmuring excuses no one really listened to, and walked toward the exit. Her heels clicked against the marble floors, each step taking her farther from the life she'd always known. No one tried to stop her. Perhaps they were relieved to see her go. The moment she stepped outside, the rain hit her face. It had started while she was inside, a steady downpour that soaked through her dress within seconds. The cold shocked her system, but she welcomed it. The rain felt like it was washing something away. Not the memories or the pain, but perhaps the pretense, the need to be someone she wasn't. She walked slowly through the palace grounds, not caring that her hair was plastered to her face or that her expensive gown was ruined. The rain mixed with her tears until she couldn't tell them apart anymore. She cried for her grandmother, who had tried and failed to protect them all. She cried for her father, trapped by choices made decades ago. She cried for herself, for the innocence lost when she opened that envelope. But beneath the grief, something else was growing, a quiet, unshakable strength. She understood now that she couldn't erase what had happened. The betrayals were real, the manipulation had occurred, the deals had been struck. Those facts wouldn't change no matter how much the family tried to bury them. But she could choose differently. She could choose integrity over comfort, truth over acceptance, freedom over belonging. Beatrice stopped and turned back one last time, looking at the massive structure that had defined her entire existence. The royal flag hung heavy, still waving above the palace despite the weather. It would continue to wave no matter what happened beneath it, hiding secrets within its shadow just as it always had. The institution would survive. It always did. That was its nature. To outlast individuals, to absorb scandals, to continue regardless of who was hurt in the process.